Just a little bit about the Campaign for Common Sense. If you've not come across us before, we've launched ourselves in May, and we're basically here to try and encourage grown-up conversation about some of the more difficult conversations that we're facing as a society. And we want to try and encourage people to do it in a way that's sensitive and polite and respectful, but that we don't shy away from things, because we think that's the best way that we can bring people together. We've got four sort of little beliefs, as it were. We think that no one side in a debate has got a monopoly on what's right and wrong. We think we've all got far more in common than it sometimes seems. We think that common sense and fair play are the best way to approach these difficult and controversial issues. And we think we should be able to talk about them frankly and calmly without trading insults. And I have to say, I'm really delighted to have Ranil with us tonight. He's a really, really busy guy. He's a government minister. He's been an MP since 2015. He works in the Department for International Trade. We're in the middle as well of the Conservative Party virtual conference. So I guess you've been busy, Ranil, between different events and whatever, and you're probably being called off to different socially distant or virtual events afterwards. I'll just say a couple of things about Ranil, which I didn't know before we first chatted, actually. It turns out we have a lot in common in that before we came into politics, Ranil, and before I went into teaching, we both worked for Lloyds Bank. So we've had some interesting stories about the joys of retail banking and in the good old days, as it were. But also he was a local councillor for years in a council around Basingstoke and Hook. He's a local boy, as it were, went to his local state schools. And it's really, really lovely to have you here, Ranil. So thank you for joining us tonight. And if it's okay, I'll start off with a really tricky question. That's not tricky at all, don't worry. This is me, ever the teacher. So when you look back at your school days, what was your mute at the moment, Ranil? So just to remind, what was your favourite subjects at school and your favourite part of school life?
Well, Mark, thank you very much for inviting me along today. It's great to be with you. It was great, of course, to admire your work previously in the New Schools Network. And education is certainly something that I think is really important. And this campaign is really important to make sure that we're giving our children the right education and not trying to, as some would have it, push them in one direction and making choices for them, rather they should make choices for themselves. But turning to my own school life, it sounds an easy question. Perhaps it's a bit trickier. I actually have to say I rather enjoyed my school life. As you say, I just my local schools in Hook and Odium, and I was very, very lucky to have some great teachers who did inspire that notion of lifelong learning, actually. If I was to choose one subject, I'd probably choose history. I think history is absolutely critical to understanding the present. You know, you have to understand the events of the past to understand what's going on today, and indeed what might happen tomorrow. It's surprising how things repeat themselves. And I should say, I mean, we are in a new Elizabethan age, aren't we? And if you think back to Elizabeth I, there are great parallels there, talking about that repetition. It was during Elizabeth I's reign that there was that growth of prosperity and indeed political prowess for Britain around the world. And Queen Elizabeth I put money behind merchants at that time who sailed around the world's oceans, and the Board of Trade grew in influence. And it's funny that we are seeing the parallels once again today. But even in my own party, there's a great history. I'm here at Central Office today because I've been doing some fringe events virtually, as you say. But, you know, Robert Peel, understanding the history of the Corn Laws and the debates, the splits that occurred then have, again, an amazing parallel with where we found ourselves last year. Those laws, of course, were abolished because the people were unhappy with the vested interests locking in high food prices. We again saw that the people spoke in the general election, and we were very clear that we were delivering on the people's priorities. So, history does repeat itself. Really useful to better understand that.
And then in terms of your wider school life, all the other things that go on when you're at school, when you look back, what are your sort of fondest memories there about stuff you got involved in or things you did?
Well, oh gosh, again, really tough question. I'm blessed with some great school friends who I'm still in touch with. I had great time being involved with all of these sort of school productions and all of that stuff. I can't say that I was ever the best sportsman. I will confess, but look, I had a really great time, and I'm really pleased that I'm now able to represent the community in which I grew up in, because so many of the people I went to school with, their friends, their families, everyone knows someone who knows me. And it's brilliant, and I feel that real sense of connection to my constituency. So I'm very grateful for that, and I know not everyone can have that. I've just been blessed with that good fortune.
So listen, okay, so you're really lucky that you get to be the MP for the area where you grew up. So we've talked about when you're at school and what you're interested in, and we've talked about the fact you became an MP in 2015. What was it that got you into politics then? Was there politics in your family, or was it something you got into through your own things? What was it that led you to want to be an MP?
Well, I mean, certainly public service is very much ingrained in my family. My father served as a magistrate for many years until he was forced to retire. But I believe we're changing these rules, which is good. My mother served as a school governor. Indeed, my father's father served in local politics in Sri Lanka. And on my grandmother's side, there was again political involvement. So public service has always been very much ingrained in me as the right thing to do to help our community, to help one another. But for me, I guess my journey started when I had the great chance, again, very local, to represent my own village on the local council, as you said in opening. And for me there, it was around making sure that local people's views were heard, that it was possible through that to serve a broader area, serving my locality. Even though I don't live in the town of Basingstoke, it's everyone's town. And so I wanted to do what I could there, and got on with the regeneration of the place, grew the economy locally, created more good jobs and better leisure facilities that everyone could enjoy. So again, it's about that service to people, service to the community. But taking that a step forward, it was a case of the opportunity arose, and I guess that's appropriate in the party of opportunity, that the opportunity arose to seek selection for my home seat in North East Hampshire, and I'm very grateful that the party locally decided to place their trust in me. And in doing so, I always said that the sorts of things I wanted to do were very much focusing on that local nature of my politics, delivering for local people the things that they want to see, things like the new hospital for North Hampshire that we've just got signed off by the Prime Minister, but also more widely around supporting families, because I know from my own background that it's not the state that runs people's lives, it's actually families who look after one another. That is, for me, absolutely crucial. And I don't think in politics it's talked about enough. So what I've wanted to do since becoming an MP is make sure that I'm looking out for the, can I say it, the average family. And too often, they're the people that are forgotten. They're the people that are left behind, and it's got to stop.
So it's interesting. You've already mentioned some of the issues that you're particularly passionate about, some of the policies you particularly want to make sure you get involved with. You're in a really fortunate position in that you're in a really, really safe Conservative seat, as it were. You've got a very big majority, and yet it might be understood, therefore, that if you were to take your foot off the pedal and sit back and relax, you might just be able to enjoy that. But you're still a very active campaigner, aren't you, in terms of local issues and national issues? So, what do you think you need to be and do in order to be a good MP? You've been doing it for 5 years now. What do you think is the key for you to be a good MP?
Well, I guess my constituents will be the judge of that, really. I have to say, I don't ever accept the premise of, safe seat. I don't think anyone should ever be taken for granted. So I've never done that. And that's why I keep working very hard for my constituents. I think it's the duty of all MPs to represent as best as they can their constituents' interests. And of course, and I think we'll probably come to this, it doesn't mean we'll always agree with one another. It doesn't mean every constituent agrees with what I do. But, you know, on the flip side, I don't make up the campaigns that I run and work on with my team. You know, they're based on what my constituents tell me is important to them. So, you know, I just think it's really important to keep working hard and repaying the trust that people put in you as a member of parliament for up to 5 years. I mean, it's funny, I've fought 3 elections in the last 5 years. It would be lovely to have 5 years to actually deliver on what I've set out to do. And I would just observe that although it might be considered by some to be a majority seat, a safe seat, though I dispute the terminology, it doesn't mean that people still don't need, you know, help alleviating their everyday issues. And that's what I think, again, MPs should be there for. And that's why I've focused on things like the new hospital for North Hampshire, a new school for North Hampshire, pushing forward with the regeneration of our retail centres, faster, longer, better trains, because we've got a lot of commuters that go up to London and the service hasn't been good enough. Better roads, because of course the vast majority of people outside of London don't commute by public transport, they commute by car. And of course just the local services that keep you know, the area greener, cleaner and safer. And you know, what are we if we haven't got safety and law and order in our area? So those are the sorts of things people tell me are important to them, and that's why I've got on with it.
And how do you juggle dealing with, if you like, the local issues that constituents are bringing to you and those important things you've listed off there, and then, if you like, the sort of the national issues that you're asked to do with your role as a government minister? You know, how do you juggle those things, and how do you deal with it when you've got, you know, clashing time commitments and so on?
Well, I mean, when you sign up to serve as a member of parliament, you know that you've got to balance these things. And as I touched on earlier, it doesn't mean that you assume that everyone in the constituency agrees with you on everything. And so, you know, clearly Brexit has dominated the last 4 years without question. You know, in my constituency, I have parts of 2 districts, and one district was 52-48 leave and the other was 52-48 remain, and you know, it was as a result quite finely balanced. But beyond that, of course, it was a nationwide vote, and it's not for any part of the country to in effect declare UDI and say, well, we voted this way, so therefore we're not going to do it. It's a nationwide vote, just like a general election. And in a general election, a constituency can vote one way, but if the country votes another, that party forms the government. And beyond that, of course, it's important to be comfortable in one's own conscience that what I might be doing at any moment in time is something that I can actually stand by and defend and be willing to be counted for. So I guess in thinking out loud, I've set out really that for me, trying to balance those things up, it's about considering what my constituency thinks and what people are telling me. It's about thinking what's right for the country, but also as an individual being elected as a representative, not a delegate, I have to be comfortable in my own conscience. And so when I was voting on things like Brexit, I was thinking about Britain's role in the world. I was thinking about, you know, who are we and what do we want to be? And so when I looked at questions like that, I said, well, the country voted to take back control of our laws, our borders and our money. And it was critical that we delivered on that. And that's what I focused on, because I could not in good conscience vote for a deal that didn't do that. And then, of course, I had folks saying that I wanted no deal. No, absolutely not. I wanted the best deal possible. And that's what I fought for. It was in some quarters very unpopular, and we might come on to that. But certainly I did what I thought was right. And in the end, on this occasion anyway, I was proven right. And I'm very glad I was. I might have been proven wrong, but I was proven right on this occasion. And the Prime Minister got the deal that everyone said was impossible.
I mean, so you came into Parliament in 2015, and that was sort of quite an unexpected majority, wasn't it? Not a lot of people expecting the Conservatives to get a majority in their right, and they did. And of course, maybe at that point, some people have been thinking, fantastic, now we can overcome this division and we can get back to politics as normal. But as you've touched upon, you then probably became an MP and you were faced with how you're going to vote in the referendum. You had your party leader obviously advocating for one thing in the end. You had to make your mind up. You went, for leave as opposed to remain. And then since then, you've had, other big votes on that issue to deal with. How's that been for you personally? You said that you have to be comfortable with it in yourself, but that can't have been easy. There must have been a lot of pressure on you to vote a particular way. And also, it sounds like you've got a constituency that was right down the middle in terms of how it went. So how did you balance all those different responsibilities and pressures on you? It must have been hard on a personal level at times.
For sure. So the last year, 2019, was just awful for anyone, whatever side of the debate they were on in Parliament. It was a truly vile place to be. And, the amount of abuse you get from outside, let alone the division inside, is something I certainly don't want to repeat. But, you referenced, of course, not siding with the then Prime Minister's perspective on this great question. And you're right, I mean, it could be said to be career limiting in some quarters. But again, it's about conscience. In my view, we have to be big enough to say that no two people agree on everything. And David Cameron is a Conservative. Absolutely, I believe he is. He's not necessarily the same sort of Conservative as me because we don't agree on everything, but that's fine. And the sooner that we all realise that no one is a sort of an identikit of another, the better. And so, at that time I said that no, I was voting to leave. Again, during the difficulty of Chequers and the original withdrawal agreement being created by Theresa May, I resigned over that because again, in good conscience, I couldn't say that this was the right deal and delivered on what the people had voted for. And you've got to sometimes say that even if it's not in my own personal interest from a career perspective, sometimes you've got to do what you think is right. And in those instances, even if it perhaps could have been said to hold me back, I wanted to know that what I was doing was the right thing, as far as I saw it.
And so, if we now move on to when you've made a decision about your stance on something, particularly maybe some of the more controversial issues or divisive issues we've had in recent times, how do you try to go about persuading people, if you like, of your cause or of your opinion, or indeed just explain yourself if people disagree with you, whether that's in Parliament or on a doorstep? What do you think are the keys to persuading people?
Well, I know someone very wise, far wiser than me, once said, lies, damn lies, and statistics. But facts and figures are useful in setting out where someone is coming from. And it could be, of course, that there are different statistics that prove each other's arguments, and that's fine too, but at least it demonstrates that there is some basis for the position that I might be putting forward. But beyond that, I think it's actually just about being honest and truthful and not trying to hedge one's bets, not trying to be everyone's yes man, and setting out that this is just where I stand, whether it is on Brexit or indeed really emotive issues like assisted suicide, for example. These are really personal matters. I mean, in the case of assisted suicide and like matters, they are conscience votes. They're never whipped in Parliament, and ultimately you've just got to say, look, this is what I think, and this is why, and help people with their own expectations of their MP, so that they are not misled into thinking that you're going to vote one way and then see through the genius of apps on our phones that you voted another. And there are some politicians, I believe, who will knock on someone's door and tell them whatever they want to hear, and then not knock on the next door neighbour's door who disagrees with everything and say that they agree with them too. And I just think that's wrong. And I think that's what's damaged trust in politics, where people have tried to be everyone's friend. And actually, I think people value that straight talking. And I think that's why Boris did so well in the general election, because he broke up that politics as usual. And he said that he's not going to, kowtow to political correctness. He's not going to pretend that people's concerns are not genuine. He's just going to work to deliver the people's priorities. And if only COVID hadn't got in the way, we'd have really seen him unleash Britain's potential. I believe that's what the memo said back in December. But it ultimately is no good me telling people what the issue is alone. I also have to listen, and I do try to demonstrate I am listening to what people have to say. I do lots of public meetings. I have that debate publicly with them in front of other people, and I hope that gets across that I have my view, but I am willing to hear other people's views, and I'm willing to respect that they have a different view. And I think that's the problem with social media, that whereas in person there is that risk that you have for one another as two people, two human beings. On Facebook and certainly on Twitter, I don't think there is any recognition that behind a Twitter handle there is a person. And I think that's a big problem for our country and for our democracy.
Now, actually, you were on Twitter and then you came off for a bit, didn't you, because of the abuse you're getting? Now you're back on there now. What was your reason for coming off when you did, and how are you treating social media differently now that you're back on there?
Yeah, good spot. I did come off after the 2017 general election. It was just truly awful, and frankly, I wasn't going to put up with it anymore. And so, no one has to be on social media. It's not in the job description that a member of Parliament must be on social media and must take all of the abuse that they get. And I have to say, for some of my female colleagues, it's even worse. It was awful. The momentum movement had been unleashed in that campaign. And some of the stuff that they'd send was just disgusting. And I didn't think it was right to humour that any longer. I did get back on in 2019 when I believed that there was a bit of light in the tunnel to get out of this the Brexit quandary that we had found ourselves in, and I wanted to begin to set out that positivity once again. And I believe in the Department for International Trade. It's a really useful vehicle to, again, try and redress that balance between all the negativity that's on social media with some positivity around what's actually happening. And so that's why I went on. But the trolls, the amount of tweets that people send you on a daily basis, and sometimes the amount of tweets that the same person sends you on a basis, I do wonder whether they've got anything else to do. And I certainly do. I'm trying to help my constituents. I'm going to get on with those priorities that they set out to me locally, and I'm going to get on with the work up here in Westminster too. So that's what I'm going to get on with. And when some of these people say, why aren't you responding? Well, that's the answer. I'm actually getting on with the job of being a member of Parliament for the whole of North East Hampshire, not for a troll on Twitter.
And so I think we've got a good insight now in terms of what you think the key is to forming your own view on something and in a way that you're happy with it. And you've talked to us about how you go about trying to persuade people of your view. But of course, you've also touched on the fact that we're not going to agree with everybody. And that probably you and I feel to sit down and have a conversation. There'll be lots we don't agree on. So what do you think is the key to disagreeing well with people? Because that's something we're really passionate about, Campaign for Common Sense. We're not all going to agree with everybody about that. So how do we almost like rediscover the lost art of disagreeing well? What do you think is the key to disagreeing well?
Yeah, well, if we had the answer to this, we'd be out there telling people, would we? For what it's worth, I really do think this cancel culture is deadly for our country and for the world and for the notion of liberal democracy, because since time immemorial, people have disagreed, but it's back to that point around the divisiveness, the nastiness of it all. And I think we've just got to be big enough, and including as politicians, to agree to disagree, not to pretend that we're going to persuade everyone to our cause. And, across the aisle, as it were, in Parliament, I have great friends on the Labour benches who I probably shouldn't name in case momentum try and deselect. Such is the world that the Labour Party still finds itself in. But we agree to disagree. We know we're not going to convert each other to each other's cause. And this notion, this idea that by growing organizations like Momentum, we're just going to get a total revolution in our politics. That's the sort of the problem. I have to say that as an observation also, as well as agreeing to disagree, I do get people saying I'm just a party man, that I always vote with the whip. But as I've said a moment ago, I rebelled a number of times in the last parliament, and indeed in the parliament before that. And then they say, well, I didn't rebel in the right way, on the right votes. So they only want you to rebel if it's in line with their own thinking. And so, you can't have it both ways. And again, it comes back to the principle of agreeing to disagree. And, if you elect MPs, you want them to use their own judgment, having looked at all the evidence that they've got in front of them, having had those discussions with colleagues on their own side and on the other side of the aisle, and to then stand by those decisions at an election where people can have their say. And people have their say in December, the people of North East Hampshire and the whole country had their say. So I don't think people can pick and choose on where they want their MP to disagree with the government. I'm a Conservative. Instinctively, I'm going to agree with more things than I disagree with from any Prime Minister, including Theresa May, David Cameron and Boris Johnson. But so people can't pick and choose. Now, one other point I'd make is I think everyone should be given their chance to air their views, and this is why I come back to that cancel culture. So you've got to agree to disagree. You've got to respect that politicians at whatever level, local government, national government, have to stand by the choices that they make, but it's for them to make their choice and not to be deselected simply because they don't agree with the thinking. It's for the electorate at large to have their say also. But I think people should be given the chance to air their own views, and I don't think there's enough recognition, as you said in the opening, that someone might have unpopular views, but they are still entitled to them. And with social media, that chance is being given, but too often those with perhaps unpopular views are hounded by a wider majority of people, and that's not right. So I think it's important that people are given that space. Can I say safe space, but use it in another way? Given a safe space to have unpopular views and to set out their thinking and why they think that. Now, I would just add, of course, that I don't believe everyone should be given necessarily an equal weight to their views. I mean, you can't have a flat earther that sits in their bedroom all day watching or making conspiracy videos matched against a professional astronomer who has spent 30 years researching their field, publishing their journals. I mean, the views aren't equal in validity necessarily, but nonetheless, someone's entitled to set out what they think. And so long as people then use that in the context in which it is set out, and listen and respond with facts, research their subject themselves rather than just blindly follow what might be on YouTube, I think that's the sort of world we've got to get to, and that's how we'll begin to help people disagree well. So that man or woman who's a flat earther can have their view, so long as they don't expect everyone to agree with them, because others say, well, no, these are the facts that I have, and I've researched this for 30 years. If we can get there, we'll be making progress.
And in terms of, you've talked about some of your friends in other political parties that you won't name so they don't get deselected. I mean, in terms of who are the people that you really admire that you disagree with? Maybe people that who don't have to worry about their political career if you endorse them. Who are the thinkers or the writers or the politicians or whatever who you fundamentally disagree with but you still think are amazing?
Well, let me choose someone who's no longer in the Commons, because they're not affected at all. And actually, he wouldn't be affected by this, but he's a brilliant man. I think Ken Clarke is an absolutely brilliant man. I think he, in my judgment, he's fundamentally flawed in Europe, but he was a fantastic chancellor. He served in government across a number of departments. I think he was Home Secretary, Education Secretary, he was Lord Chancellor. As well as being Chancellor of the Exchequer, and someone who had great experience, but built that up because he was brilliant at his job. He, I think, is a truly brilliant man, and I was delighted to see that he is to be in the House of Lords. And though I disagree with him, I think he has so much to add to our public discourse. And I think that's the point I'm making a moment ago. You know, I don't have to agree with him on everything to think that actually he has a lot to add, and his views are certainly valid.
And in terms of anyone from, if you like, from the left of centre, in a similar vein, who you might not agree with a lot, but you just think are brilliant and you admire for how they've gone about things.
Yeah, well, you know, I have to say, Tony Benn, legendary figure, right? The late Tony Benn. I fundamentally disagree with all of his views, pretty much. But you know, I respect him, and I remember when I was much younger, hearing him at an evening Q&A session that he came to Basingstoke, and I just thought, look, I still disagree with you, but I love the way that you back up your own thinking with genuine personal reflection and thought, that you genuinely believe what you're saying, not driven by focus group, and that whether it was popular or unpopular in the Labour Party at any point in time, he'd stand by those values. And you know, I think that's much to be commended. I think he said, you know, there are signposts and weather vanes, and indeed many others have said similar. And he said he always wanted to be a signpost, and I think there's much to be said for that.
It's funny you should mention Tony Benn, because one of our previous guests has also brought up Tony Benn when I've asked him this question. And I've used the anecdote that I remember. One of the most brilliant school trips I ever went on was in the sixth form. And I went to one of those politics events at Westminster Central Hall.
Yes.
And literally we had John Redwood was on stage doing his thing. Okay. And then after him was Tony Benn. And they were both in their own completely different ways. Absolutely brilliant. And what I think would be really sad is both of those guys would find people challenging them if they were doing stuff like that today. I think maybe John Redwood still does. People would be challenging them for even being on the same panel, wouldn't they? Which is such a shame, because they're both brilliant exponents of what they believe, but they both have that respect for people that hold different views to them.
I totally agree. And, you know, the worrying thing is that the Labour Party was squeezing people out on the other side. You know, the people who are closer perhaps to me felt that they couldn't be part of the Labour Party anymore. And, you know, decent people like Chris Leslie, for example, who, again, I disagree with on Europe, but I agree with them on many other things. You know, he felt he couldn't stand as a Labour Party candidate, and he had to leave for, you know, the Change UK or whatever they became in the end. And that's a real shame that political parties and our system work on the basis that we are broad churches. And so we have a coalition, as it were, within each party. And we don't all have to agree on everything. And that's great, because that diversity of thought leads to better decisions. And instead of the other system of sort of PR and politicians cobbling coalitions together behind closed doors. This is a coalition that's brought straight to the people. This is the manifesto that we're all standing behind. This is what we're going to agree on. And then individual politicians like John, like Ken, who both stood on the same manifesto in 2017, then had different views on certain matters, and they're known locally to their constituents for that.
So we've talked about, you know, disagreeing well and how we agree well, and we talked about some of the issues that you faced as an MP. What do you think are the biggest challenges the country faces today, and how do you think we should go about building alliances, including people that don't agree with us, as it were, or just that don't agree with you? How do you think we go about building alliances to deal with those challenges?
Well, perhaps I can return to what I said at the outset around families. I think that the idea of supporting families is the biggest challenge for the country today, because it covers so many things. And, you know, talking about families and family values and so on, it's deeply unfashionable. But I nonetheless think it's the right thing to do. So I'll talk about it on this webinar, because that's exactly what your excellent campaign is there for, is to allow us to all speak out on these sorts of issues. And, you know, I believe that government simply cannot do everything for everyone. And rather, families are there to look after one another, with the state providing a safety net, where there is a problem that needs to be fixed. And that's why I think David Cameron actually deserves a mention here, because Cameron, I think, really sought to place family at the core of what he did. And perhaps he was interrupted in part by the Liberal Democrats, in part by Brexit, which only gave him a year of a majority. But as we get through COVID, our own current challenge, having delivered Brexit already, perhaps we can go back to that sort of thinking from David Cameron and from Ian Duncan Smith, who is, of course, a great man in this area, who's done some great work at the Centre for Social Justice on pushing forward this notion. And if I remember correctly, there are two big figures to get your head around, if I may. The first is that there's a £51 billion annual cost to the taxpayer of family breakdown. And the second figure is even bigger. It's a £1.24 trillion annual value of unpaid care and unpaid household work. So, that 51 billion figure, the first one on family breakdown, that's across 5 areas. It's tax and benefits, housing, health and social care, criminal and civil justice and education. And I think that was from the Relationships Foundation. And, that is a phenomenal cost, not only to the taxpayer, but to people, and to people's lives, because the review of all the academic research shows that the impact of divorce and separation on children shows that those children will grow up in households with lower incomes and poorer housing. They'll perform less well in school. They'll need more medical treatment. They'll become pregnant or become a parent at too early an age. And there will be higher levels of smoking, drinking and other drug use during their childhood and adolescence as well. So, that's deeply worrying, not only, as I say, for the taxpayer, but for those people in their own lives. And ultimately, politics is about people and helping people live better lives than we had the chance to do ourselves. So I think that's really, really important, that we try and deal with those sorts of challenges. And my understanding, and again, this is deeply unfashionable, but I'm going to say it, and I've been on the record before saying this, that 35% of couples who are unmarried at the birth of their child had split up by their child's 5th birthday, compared to only 9% of parents who get married before the birth. And I know some people criticize David Cameron for sort of talking about marriage and supporting it through the tax system with the marriage allowance, even though that only supports a fraction of folks. There are a lot more, there are many more people who would benefit from it. But I think he was onto something there. And I think we should look further at that. Of course, that policy, the marriage allowance, still remains, and I'm pleased that that's the case. But there's also that bigger parcel, and this is the even bigger challenge. This £1.24 trillion value of unpaid care and other work, and that's an ONS figure. That's that's the government's own figures, and so I think the government recognises that this is an important area, but we need to do more here, because in the UK, single people without family responsibilities, and I think I wrote in the Telegraph about this when I was at CCHQ as a vice chairman. Single people without family responsibilities face a tax burden lower than the OECD average, 8% lower, I think. So they get a good deal, and we are a low tax economy for them. But single earner married couples who have a couple of children face an income tax burden of 26% more. So they get a really bad deal out of the tax system against their OECD peers. And part of that's down to the George Osborne high income child benefit charge, which creates huge marginal tax rates for single earner households above £50,000, but allows a 2-earner household with an income of £99,998 to get it all. And so, I mean, those sorts of perversities in the system really disadvantage those that try and look after themselves without recourse to the state. And until we can have honest conversations about marriage and divorce, about families and single parents, without being portrayed as some Victorian, then hardworking people all over the country are going to be disadvantaged, particularly in the north of England, Hence, that's why I think, again, they responded to Boris shaking up politics as usual and not being wedded to that politically correct nature of SW1 politics. And, you know, a lot of them are single earner households. A lot of them would benefit from policies that support a more traditional family. And it's not to say, of course, it's not to say that other, you know, single parents aren't doing a smashing job trying to do the very best for their children. Of course, it's not saying that, but it's saying where we can support other families who perhaps still need it, we should. And of course, that frees up the state to really provide the support of those in the most need, rather than simply, as you know, we had very perverse incentives under tax credits and so on, which universal credit has tried to solve.
So okay, so you're one of the few politicians I've heard in recent years talking about family and those kinds of things in the way that you have done. How do you go about building that alliance of people then that are prepared to grapple with that subject? And again, you've touched on it. How do you do it in a way that doesn't come across as, you know, back to basics, Tories judging people, that kind of stuff? What do you think is going to be the key there to make this happen then?
Yeah, well, I mean, so first of all, you're absolutely right. And, you know, the human condition is that no one is perfect. So the minute we pretend that any politician or otherwise is perfect, we've misread the situation. So I mean, that's St. Augustine. But ultimately, I think this is the sort of issue where we can work cross-party and we can listen across the aisle at the challenges that people face. You know, the red wall is now a blue wall, but there are still plenty of red seats around where they will have many similar personal circumstances coming into their postbags as my Conservative colleagues, where, you know, we do want to try and, for example, tackle drug use. We want to tackle the county lines issue that enables that to happen, where we do want to try and improve people's educational performance, and you know, there are ways that we can try and do that. Michaela, for example, is a great example of where there are lower income households, which disproportionately are those where children are separated, but not only, but they have done fantastically well with the children who come to that school, where we can try and help people with their own personal health. A lot of that's around prevention, around drug use and drinking and smoking, but also early diagnosis. And that's too often in those less well-off groups, that's not forthcoming. But also in return, and there's a trade-off here, I think people need to also recognise where some of the prevention can be for the situation in the first place. And I think we've got to have those sorts of conversations cross-party. But I think some excellent third-party groups like the Relationships Foundation, you know, the Centre for Social Justice and so on, these are the organisations that can really build that consensus far better than any politician, because they're doing it independently of politics. And these really big issues, just like, dare I say, the referendum, they transcend party politics. These big issues need independent bodies to, and by independent, I don't mean out of the political fray, but independent bodies nonetheless, to go and make a case and try and sign up people to their cause. But they've got to be bold enough to work with politicians who are willing to speak honestly about these difficult issues. And that's been the issue for too long, that politicians don't feel able to, because of the abuse you get on Twitter. I saw some really awful stuff on Facebook as well, which usually is a bit better than Twitter. When I wrote that article in the Telegraph, people said, "Can you believe this? He is," and this was one of my constituents. "He is saying that I am a failure as a mother." And no, that's not what I said. I didn't say that at all. People can go back to the article in Telegraph. They mustn't read into someone's article or someone's speech what they want to see because they want to attack that politician. Rather, they should try and better understand where that person is coming from and perhaps provide an alternative point of view also. That's absolutely fine. But that sort of divisiveness, that's the problem.
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up, and about sort of people engaging with politicians and politicians with people, because we've got an audience tonight, and I'm going to go to some of their questions now, if that's okay. So So the first one here is from Luca, and it's funny actually talking about people accusing you of stuff which you didn't say. Something we've been pushing hard on with the Campaign for Common Sense in the last couple of weeks is some of the more worrying stuff which is being done under the name of anti-racism. Of course, we're all anti-racist. You know, everyone is anti-racist apart from the small number of racists we've got. But some of the stuff being in the name of anti-racism we find quite worrying, and as a result, surprise, surprise. I've been called a racist for questioning some of these more things. So the question from Luke is, how can we deal with the negative sort of neo-Marxist aspects of anti-racism that people are banding about? I suppose particularly with a view to some of the stuff we've seen this summer around the Black Lives Matters movement and some of the woke stuff that's coming from there. What do you think we can do about that?
Yes, well, no, I mean, this is a very good question, Luca. And look, I mean, the first of all, I have to say that clearly peaceful protest is something that I support. And people should be able to have that freedom of assembly. And these are difficult times, but you know, as a principle, people should have that freedom of assembly and the ability to set out their view, whatever they are, even if I disagree with them, including if they are Marxists, then they should be able to set out their views. But I think part of the problem has been that the state, over many governments, has felt uncomfortable tackling people who are simply a criminal element under the guise of a principled protest.
Mm-hmm.
And what do I mean by that? Well, you know, there will be some people, of course, who quite rightly felt that what happened in the United States was wrong, and they wanted to make their views heard. But there are others who then took that and devalued the importance of that campaign by trying to weave in this neo-Marxist ideology, which ultimately can be summed up as wanting to overthrow the state as we know it. And those people who desecrated national monuments, those people who tore a statue in Bristol and put it into the water, I mean, these people, they are criminals and they should be treated as criminals. The law has to apply equally to everyone. And so if that is the case, then it has to apply to people who pretend that they are protesters, but are actually common criminals, as much as it applies to anyone else. If I went to rip down a statue, I would be arrested, and quite rightly so. It's not my statue to rip down. And so the law has to apply equally there. And I think Priti Patel has done a great job at giving the police that confidence again, that they can enforce the law, that they are there to uphold the law rather than serve the community. I mean, I think there is an importance in that sort of mission statement that people have. And, you know, people want a police force. They want people who are going to enforce the law. And Priti Patel's absolutely the right Home Secretary who's going to get them to get on and do that, as they once were able to do before the political correctness of New Labour took hold. So I think this is the way we do it. It's about upholding the rule of law. It's not about taking sides on any particular issue. It's saying the law applies equally to everyone.
I think for me, in terms of that statue being pulled down in Bristol, the people I felt most sorry for when I reflected on it was those people that had been campaigning legitimately and through democratic means to get it pulled down for years, who had sat through all the council meetings, got their petitions together, and all of that hard work was dismissed and ignored, and the mob got to have their way. And I just thought that was a really sad lesson to be giving out to the rest of the country at that point, even though I understood why lots of people were very uncomfortable with that particular statue. Moving on, we've got a question here from Lynn. Do you think today's universities need to be reminded of the need for free speech?
Yes, absolutely, unequivocally, yes. And Michelle Donnellan's doing some great work in this area to try and make sure that that is the case. Certainly, I remember my time at LSE, and in fact, we used to have a weekly union general meeting. There's no politics more raw and bitter than student union politics, right? But this was particularly active on the basis people used to be on a balcony upstairs and throw paper at a speaker if they disagreed. It was all taken in good jest. This was part of the deal. The political hacks sat downstairs, made their speeches, and the athletics union upstairs were the people having their say. You know, that was free speech, and you were able to have your point of view. And I was a conservative on campus, and the Conservatives were the biggest party, in fact, because the left was so fractured across all sorts of little different groups. But everyone was able to have their say. And I remember campaigns of Israel, for example, back then, where some wanted to, in effect, boycott Israel, and others would stand up and say, no, that is wrong. And, you know, that freedom of speech does seem to be being lost. And, you know, when you have examples of people like Amber Rudd not being allowed to speak at a university, who's, you know, terribly moderate conservative, that's just bizarre. You know, it just shows that we've lost the plot. And universities need to remember that ultimately they get a hell of a lot of government funding, so that that young people, I was about to say children, but it does seem that they're infantilizing their students. But you know, young people are able to hear these sorts of views and develop as people, develop their own views from that, and go out in the world and make their way. And if they aren't able to experience that diversity of thought, then that makes our world a far lesser place than it might otherwise be.
Thank you so much. I've got a question that came in from email, by email now, from someone called Richard, and they're saying, what's more important, do you think? Diversity of ethnicity or characteristic, or diversity of thought?
Well, I think both are important in true political style, but diversity of thought is the key, because it will actually be the driver of the other previous factors. You know, if you are open to having a wide range of thoughts in a political party, in an organization, on a social media platform, at a university, then you will instinctively and naturally build up a base of people that are different from one another. You know, being blunt, women will have different views from men. Ethnic minorities will have different views from white British people. That is perfectly natural because of different backgrounds and so on. And if you are open to the notion of diversity of thought, all the rest will follow. So I absolutely think both are important, but thought is the key to getting all the rest.
So how do you think we're going to square that circle then? So this is my question now, because we've got this real clash of ideas going on, haven't we, or views, where some people feel that protected characteristics are the key, and we've got the Equality Act, and that's how, those are the kind of diversities we should be pushing. But on the other hand, there's other people coming from maybe where I would be that worry that if you push too hard on that, you actually end up dividing people and making other people feel left behind. So how would you, given that you think they're both important, square that circle and reassure people?
Well, I mean, there's a really important point around that whole diversity agenda, because what you don't want is for people to feel that someone's only got a job or a position or whatever because they were that type of characteristic.
Yeah.
You know, I don't want to be deemed to have got my job because I have Asian blood. I don't want, you know, some of my fantastic female colleagues to be deemed to only be MPs or ministers because they are women. That would be wrong. And, you know, where you saw some crazy things like, I saw people were saying at the proms, right, that there was a brilliant South African black singer. And people were saying, well, is she only on there because of the BLM? And is this BBC trying to provide a tick against BLM, and there's a balance to Rule Britannia being sung as the campaign successfully secured? And you know, actually, no, she was a fantastic singer, but this is the environment that we are creating, where people question that someone is there only because they are who they are, rather than because of what they can do. And so how can we square this? I mean, from a political party's perspective, I think we've got to be resolute in our the way we take forward our selections and so on, that, you know, we want to make sure it's open genuinely to everyone. We've got to make adjustments that make sure, for example, disabled candidates can come forward. We can make sure that the party is clear that no discrimination in selection interviews will be tolerated. But at the same time, we simply try and select the best candidates for the job. and let people have their say on that basis. And if we can do things like that and take a lead ourselves, I think that will be very powerful, because I think the rest of government will then begin to follow. And certainly in some of the public appointments that ministers get to see, I've been very clear that we are going to select the best people there based on what we need as a government, not on ticking diversity boxes. And instinctively, we get a lot of different people of different backgrounds, because they will make sure that the government gets what it needs. We've got to, from a governmental perspective, send a very clear signal that this is what diversity is really about. It's about everyone having a fair crack at the whip, rather than people being given a quota to take it or leave it.
Brilliant, that's really helpful. Thank you. So I'm going to get the final question now, and sort of maybe just if you can sort of keep it to 90 seconds, 2 minutes, which is, we've been living through a really divided time, especially politically. If you could imagine this was a magic wand, if you could wave a magic wand and get one thing to happen or change one thing to try and bring people back together, I know it's a big question. What would it be it politically or other ways? What would you do?
Well, oh gosh, I mean, that is just such an impossible question, particularly for 90 seconds. But I mean, look, the most divisive issue of our time has been Brexit, right? So what I would want to see is that we secure this great deal that we've said we can, this trade agreement like Canada has. We're not asking for a special British deal, we're asking for a deal that the EU's already given Canada, and we secure it, we take it forward, and we deliver some positives as we believe we can on the other side, securing trade agreements with the US, Australia, New Zealand. We've already got the great deal with Japan that's beyond what the EU was able to secure with them. We join the CPTPP. We look at future FTAs with other great markets around the world. I mean, there's so many to mention, but you've got, the opportunity potentially of the Gulf, the Cooperation Council, the GCC, India, Mercosur, others around the world. And we deliver these things. And then we can begin to bring on that front, at least, the country back together to say, look, not everyone agreed with where we went. Certainly no one, I think, agreed with the journey we took to get there. But we're there now, and there is a positive future for our country, a positive future for our people, and most importantly, coming back to the point I sort of raised earlier around why we're in politics. There's a positive future for the next generation, so that my two daughters can live better lives in their lifetime than we all live today.
Thank you so much, Ranil. That's a really, really lovely way to wrap it up. Thanks for giving up your time. I know how busy you are. On behalf of everyone that's been watching tonight and all the people that are going to watch this when we stick it up on YouTube and Facebook and all that jazz, thank you so much. For those that have been watching, thank you so much. I'm sorry we didn't get to everybody's question, but we've run out of time. Please do watch out for the next few webinars that we've got coming up soon. We're going to continue to try and ask people to share with us their thoughts on how we can agree, but more importantly, disagree better. Have a lovely evening. Ranil, thank you very much. And we're going to call it a night there. Goodbye, everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.